Welcome to the Frontier Leader Show. Today, Martin is speaking to Amanda Daering.
The companies being most successful in actually becoming AI native, they are able to encourage their workforce or train their workforce or however, or hire the right people, whatever, who can take that much accountability and who can have that broad of a scope. Where I see that hit in organizations that maybe aren't ready for that or, just have really deeply ingrained traditions is that they think of AI training as being about the skill of how to use AI. And that's part of it, right? It's new to people and they have to figure it out. But I think a bigger part of it is that willingness. Okay, if I'm one person and I built 20 agents and ultimately I'm responsible for the output of those 20 agents in your organization, is that something to be proud of or is that terrifying?
Hello and welcome to the Frontier Leader Show. I'm Martin Wheatley, and each week I speak to leaders, coaches, practitioners and technologists working out what good leadership looks like in an AI-shaped world. While you still have the app open, please hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss it on the next episode. And if you like what you hear in this conversation, I have a growing number of resources available at www.theaileaderlab.com, and the link will be in the show notes. But today we are speaking to Amanda Daering. Amanda advises operators and allocators on the new patterns shaping companies, capital and work. She spent 2 decades in workforce advisory, ultimately building and selling Newance, which is a US-based recruitment and people operations consulting firm. Amanda writes regularly on Substack and LinkedIn about what she is noticing across capital, technology and culture, along with conversations she's having with leaders across America, knitting those things together to paint a much clearer picture of what is actually going on. And that is grounded in data and not hype, which is also prevalent in today's world. Her current work helps senior leaders orient themselves and their teams early enough to act. So without much further ado, Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. So excited to be here.
Yes, this is going to be fantastic. As we were saying in the warm-up, I tend to write, I've written a little bit about the impact of people and everything on AI. So I'm looking forward, from AI. So I'm looking forward to getting into this and exploring what you're seeing and how you're building out your projects at the minute. But before we get on to that, do you want to just give us a bit of an overview about what you've done in the past and what you're now working on?
Sure. You did such a beautiful job in the intro, so I'll try to not be too repetitive. Have typically been on the people side of things, whether as an entrepreneur, whether as an in-house talent leader, but always see labor as more of a critical business function than a line item. And so really after building Newance for a number of years, seeing on the ground, right, what different organizations were doing, how they were building, was really seeing a white space between economic theory, which is great and smart and important, and oftentimes from people who maybe haven't been on the ground, or, really tactical tips or alarmist headlines that don't tell you much about what you can and should do right now. And so my goal moving forward is really to help people identify what's happening structurally. How do you find yourself, map yourself within that to make the best moves ultimately for you, for your career, for your team, for your organization.
And it's an interesting time because like you said there's that much hype and media and doom and gloom on one side and eternal optimism on the other. It's really hard to kind of cut through that and figure out what actually is going on. So do you want to, what are you researching at the minute and how do you see things shifting, I suppose, right now?
Sure. One of the big misconceptions I think people have is that they look at AI adoption or where we're at in that change curve and they sort of look at are jobs being replaced or are jobs not being replaced? And that tends to be the first question and sort of the binary lens that we look at it through. And ultimately, that's because jobs used to be how we organized workplaces, how we organized societies. The job was sort of I call it the atomic unit, right? The smallest measurable bit, the job. What AI has introduced is a way for the workflow to be the atomic unit, the smallest bit we look at, right? So rather than I create a job and I put a person in it, I look at workflows and I think what part of this should be a person, what part of this should be technology. And so that creates a shift in just the way organizations think about being organized, the way they think about work. And so the job numbers, which is one thing that I look at, they might look relatively stable or the same. They might have headlines about layoffs, but what I think people miss in that is that it's actually more subtle than that. There's a reclassification of labor happening within that. People might have the same job and the same job title, but now one person might be in what I call sort of a cog work model, the sense that you're being deeply measured and transactional. And another person might be in what I'm calling marquee talent. Like they are so valuable now that they're worth 10 or 100 times, which sounds wild, but can be true, maybe what they used to be, right? So I think people get hung up on job and title. And I think the reality is the deal underneath is what's changing. And once you can notice that, you can make different moves.
Mm. And what's the dividing line between those? Because I mean, you're right. I can kind of see where you're going with it in terms of somebody who, I suppose, embraces AI and adapts to the newer way of working is going to 10x or 100x not only their output but potentially their value to whoever they are providing their services to. What's the kind of dividing line that you see?
Sure. I think sometimes it's AI, right? Maybe an AI researcher, right? If one of 100 people who can do what they do, that's sort of easy to see how they become really critical marquee talent. But it's not just about AI. Somebody might be a 1 in a million salesperson. And right now it's noisy. It's hard to get attention. It's trust is low, right? So if you are a 1 in a million salesperson, maybe you don't even use AI, but you are that good. You either have the right relationships, you have some secret sauce, whatever it is, right? You are that good that your market knows you by name. I see that as the dividing line. People who don't work with you, have never worked with you, if they know you and they know your work and they know how great you are, that's a really good signal that you are marquee talent. So maybe it's AI based, but it's usually more about people know you for outsized impact.
And how are you mentioned the atomic unit there from jobs to workflows. How are you seeing that develop through your own perspectives and those that you talk to people across the states? How is that developing at the minute?
Sure. I think this is one of those things that's happening subtly, but happening quite a bit. So I'll give you an example. So there was just OpenAI just released a study on how ChatGPT is changing work. And about 43% of the job-specific tasks people were doing were not in their functional area. Meaning, maybe I'm an accountant, and for whatever reason, to solve my problem, I need some sort of marketing skill, marketing something created. And so I'm using AI to do it. So one way is that you're seeing scope expand and you're seeing people prioritize the problem that they're solving over the role that they're in. So another example would be a salesperson doesn't think of themselves as a data analyst. And they probably, in years past, in a big enterprise, would have said, oh, I need a data analyst to look at all of this information for me and help me make sense of it. But now I might be a salesperson and I'm using AI to also be a data analyst. And so that scope is getting bigger. And people are sort of identifying more and more with the problem they're being solved. Another actually really good example of that is Uber engineering is using these like agentic pods that are engineers and then business subject matter experts, right? Swarms of people around a problem. So that's another good way, a good example, right? More important than your title or your seat, what problem are you focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the old way, I say the old ways of working, obviously they are still current for the vast majority of people, but people do get hung up on the title and this is my job and, I don't really need to deviate from my job, and decisions are distilled through committees and teams and whoever else is in that decision making pyramid. Are you seeing that kind of structure or process change from a kind of I was going to say more of a macro level, but from an overall organization?
Where I see it is that the companies being most successful in actually becoming AI native, they are able to encourage their workforce or train their workforce or however, or hire the right people, whatever, who can take that much accountability and who can have that broad of a scope. Where I see that hit in organizations that maybe aren't ready for that or, just have really deeply ingrained traditions is that they think of AI training as being about the skill of how to use AI. And that's part of it, right? It's new to people and they have to figure it out. But I think a bigger part of it is that willingness. Okay, if I'm one person and I built 20 agents and ultimately I'm responsible for the output of those 20 agents in your organization, is that something to be proud of or is that terrifying? And so or both.
Yeah, both I would say. Because that's a subtle shift, isn't it? From people come in, they do a role, they get known for something that they do, and coming back to the 43.5% that you mentioned earlier on ChatGPT. I saw that on your LinkedIn post actually today, wasn't it? Or yesterday, sorry. And if people are broadening their horizons or their kind of sphere of influence from what they're usually known for, it kind of opens them up to a bit more risk, doesn't it, in terms of they are responsible for these 20 agents, whether they go off and do brilliant things or whether something goes wrong and they, they go off and do a whole host of rubbish that nobody wants.
Yes. And I think this isn't an indictment of workers, right? People have been trained to work end to end and stay in their lane for very good reasons. You couldn't scale an organization to 10,000 people with having a bunch of people popping up outside of their box and getting their hands in all of these different areas before. Like, it was a feature, not a bug of an organization to contain information and to disperse accountability. Like, there were good reasons and rationale that happened. I just think people are underestimating the force of that now that they're trying to change it.
Yeah, agreed. So how are you currently working with the operators of the world to realign themselves to what you're seeing in reality?
Sure. I think one is helping people see that map, right? Helping people see what signals to look for outside of title, right? That maybe used to be a surefire one. Another is helping operators to say, is our business model still aligned to the strategy we're using there? What are we thinking? What does the next 5 to 10 years of our business look like? And are we, is our succession planning include AI in it? Is a good question. I think people used to have, and again, rightfully so, the tech roadmap was over here. And this is where we make technology decisions. And this is where the technology budget lives. And the people roadmap is over here. And this is where we make talent decisions. I could see a future. And again, all of this hinges on overcoming tradition and past and politics. But I could see a future in which the CTO and the CHRO are the same person. I think that's a really interesting combination of purview. I think the right people in both of those seats have more in common than they think. They are systems thinkers. They plan for exceptions. They know how to align a driving force to the business goal, whether that driving force is labor or technology. So I've never heard anyone else say that. I haven't seen anyone totally do it yet, but I have started to see HR getting tucked into technology, maybe a IT director reporting to a CHRO. I think if I would bet money that if people could do that successfully, it would be really impactful.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting take, isn't it? I can see the kind of structural logic behind it, because if you treat an agent as essentially the same as a person insofar as the access it has, the structure that it sits under, how it's, what you do with it to set it up, what you do with it to kind of onboard it and offboard it, if you like. It's very, especially the way you can build agents or agentic technology now in a business. It does mirror a lot of HR processes more than it mirrors IT, doesn't it?
Yes. And so you can see that's a really great example of once you look at a workflow instead of a role, that's a really good example of it, right? When you see, okay, what I need to do is map an incredibly complex amount of resources and orchestrate them for maximum benefit, that's a workflow versus a seat. And as soon as you look at the workflow first, the seats tend to shift a little bit. Not that everyone will. I think there will still be a lot of companies who don't change. Maybe they add a chatbot here and there, but they otherwise, do things the way they do them. I've been doing this work for decades, and I have had in the recent past clients who still have paper files. This is, I think those of us who are excited about technology and living in this technology world, it's easy for us to lose sight of, we get really hung up on how good the models are getting, which is true. And, I think anybody who's watching that would be like, yeah, these things are really leaping and bounding, right? But at the same time, there are companies that exist because one person has key relationships, or they have for multi-generations, right? I'm thinking of a company in the Midwest they're on their 5th generation CEO. Like, this person who's smart and capable is selling to some other person's grandkid. And, their families have been working together for 5 generations. Does AI unseat that? I don't know. It's just as real. And so I always sort of like to pull from both and help people see the balance.
Yeah, no, it reminds me, my background is operational finance, and all reconciliation between our system and the supplier's system, and trying to pay money across as quickly as we could, basically. And there was always one person in the accounts team who, regardless of the fact that you could reconcile it all on the system, printed everything off and went through it with a pen and a paper and ticked and crossed and then scanned it back in and then emailed it back out. And you're like, certain people will always work a certain way until they get comfortable. Certainly until they get comfortable. But some people will always prefer the old-fashioned way, I suppose. But it's an interesting conversation, trying to remember that, if you're not constantly looking at technology like you and I are, there are people who do it a completely different way that you would think has been outdated for ages, but actually is still very much real.
Very much so. I think we can all think of those.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone on the call, everyone listening is nodding along. Yep. I know that one person in accounts who works on that spreadsheet that keeps the whole company ticking along. But yeah, what do you have like a signature kind of framework that you work with people to kind of understand how their organization is moving or could move?
Yes. And it starts with their business model. I think I think a mistake people have long made when thinking about people and talent in general is to just sort of find some benchmarks and then do what everybody else does. I always people underestimate how fast the pace of change is usually that. One person saying to another person, well, how are you guys doing it? And then the other person saying, oh, we're doing this. So, that is some of the value I provide to people, is telling you what other people are doing so that you know and can reflect on it. But I think the core is really to start at what the business model is and where it's going. And then aligning within that, what kinds of arrangements do we need to have? What is the tenor of, for example, there were a lot of companies in 2025 when they did these layoffs, picked a narrative that this is for AI, we're AI first. That was more palatable often to the market to say, we're really tech forward sounds way better than we wildly overhired in 2021 and 2022. And so at the time, that was a more pleasant message. And for some of them, they burned some bridges on the way out, right? They said, oh, if AI replaces some labor, then labor is therefore less valuable. And so we'll just burn the bridges because we just really aren't going to need people the way we did. Well, in my framework, what you have to think about is what talent is actually exponentially more valuable right now, and how do we make sure that we're thinking about how to be attractive and engaging? How do we think about how to give those people the right opportunity within an organization, right? When you start to think of this in terms of different types of classes instead of more labor or less labor, I think it becomes really much more strategic. The other thing we'll help people do is, we are thinking about expanding in this geography. We are thinking about, should we build or buy this type of, new service offering? Like, these are things where you need to look at the system of talent and say, okay, well, you're going to be labor is a marketplace like anything else. And I don't say that to devalue people. I say that because I think the pragmatism of it helps people make better decisions for all involved. And so when you understand the market dynamics you're working with, you make better decisions.
Yeah. It's interesting what you were saying about some of the conversations you're having is just to say this is what other people are trying and this is what they're building. Because there was the article that you wrote, I think it was the end of July, on coexistence. Everybody's looking at it and thinking AI is moving extremely fast, which the technology is. But the adoption is going to intersect with the old tech or old ways of working as that's working its way through, and the different. I can't remember the exact years and everything like that, but I just wondered if you wanted to touch on that kind of transition that you've obviously researched on that piece that you wrote.
Sure. So a few different components. In terms of the timing for that piece, like I said, in 2025, it was very popular to say we're going AI first. Not popular necessarily amongst the workforce, but popular amongst C-suite leaders and the public markets is very popular. 2026, that narrative is less popular. You can watch the market respond when people say that. I always call it like moving from decks to desks. You can see what's happening as the grand vision is moving from dystopian headline into mid-sized manufacturer and what's happening there, right? It's hitting reality. It's hitting, to your point, the old ways of working. You're starting to see headlines even pop up now like, oh, some of these companies are rehiring, or you're starting to see these, more like AI, bad AI news, right? It escapes the sandbox. Whoa, that makes people pull back. This happens, that happens. Whoa, it makes people pull back. So the sentiment changes, and the narrative about the bubble popping is, I can feel it like ticking up. Maybe you can too. If not, I would love to hear your thoughts there. But, there's this sort of much more chatter about like, okay, this is a bubble. Okay, does it pop? Okay, when does it pop? Right? There's skepticism about AI newly. And I think it's a mistake to think that skepticism means that we're done transitioning. And so some of the examples I included in there were, the horse and the car coexisted for decades. Steam to engines coexisted for decades. It's just, we have a funny way of thinking that because it's a revolution, that means instant. And I think what happens really is that the hype maybe gets sorted out a little bit, but the change keeps moving underneath it.
Yeah, it was an interesting read because you're right. I guess there's some people who early adopters, they go all in, they try and change everything rightly or wrongly now. Some of them want to wait until the technology's been around a bit longer. And coming back to the boom bit, yeah, I guess whether there is a boom or a bust, the technology is now here. All the data centers are being built, all the infrastructure is being built to support it. So it's not going to suddenly go boom and it's not going to be there anymore, is it? It's going to be, even if it does and the market drops for a bit, it will still continue to be adopted because the technology is that, even in such a short space of time, it's interwoven into that many different things now. It's just going to continually, transition across, isn't it? Do I think it's going to take, was it the mainframe to PC was something like 25 years,
yes.
I think, on
We're still
one
kind
of the
of
charts that you had. We're still kind of in it. I guess the question that I get asked quite a bit is how quickly is that gonna happen? The whole Robert Solow paradox of when do you start seeing the economic benefit of things, which was what 15, 20 years, and I think it's going to be quicker. But coming back to what your point is, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, and just because it's all around doesn't mean everybody's using it now. Most of the conversations I have are with people who just don't know what that first step is, and I don't know if that's similar to what you're having, but it's often that. I don't want to say anxiety, but maybe it is a bit of anxiety behind. We know it's important, we know it could help transform things, but we don't know what to do with it. So we're just going to hang fire for a little bit.
Sure. I think some of it's anxiety. I think for some people, it's grief. I think people find a lot of identity in their work. People find a lot of identity in getting a lot of stuff done. And if you tell someone, oh, this is going to get a lot of your stuff done, but don't worry, it'll free you up to think bigger, that's exciting to some people. And that's not at all exciting to some other people. So I think some of it is identity. I think some of it, to your point, is just a lack of knowledge or still figuring it out. Or, you do the difference between somebody who does one bad prompt and is like, this thing is dumb, and the difference between somebody who's, I'm going to build a company from scratch and it's going to be totally AI native. So I just think it's so much easier right now to build a team from scratch that's AI native, or acqui-hire a team who are AI native, people who trust each other and know how to work together. I call these ensembles, right? The trust is already there. The speed is already there. The tech savvy is already there. I think we'll see more of that, trying to bring those people in a group, staring down a 5,000 person organization and saying, okay, we're going to be AI first. I think that's going more clunkily. I don't even think that's a real word, but it feels like the only one I can use because it just feels so clunky.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the acqui-hire thing, I mean, that's a relatively new term, I think, over this side of the pond, but I've heard it in relation to, I can't think what the company was now, but obviously it's another, what does that actually mean from a people, talent, M&A perspective?
Sure. So acqui-hiring broadly is when an acquisition, one company acquires another company, maybe largely, maybe entirely, maybe partially, just for the talent. Meaning the company is made up of the talent and the technology. So a good example of this is Google buying Windsurf. They acqui-hired the Windsurf executive team for a huge sum. They actually didn't even scoop most of the technology and most of the team. That got scooped up later by Cognition. And so that can be, when you are intentionally trying to hire the talent, and so you absorb the company to get the talent. That's one example of that. Another way people can do this is, let's say this happens in creative agencies, actually. A core creative team might move sort of together, one agency to another. It's not acqui-hiring, but they're moving together to stay together because they trust each other. They still might have individual offer letters, and not everybody's structurally set up for this yet. But my thinking on it is that noise is up, trust is down. If you're doing any hiring right now, you're probably inundated with fake resumes, real resumes from people that they wrote with AI that you just still don't know if it's real, right? Anytime noise is up, people lean back on what they found to be reliable signals, and who is can be a really reliable signal, or people think that it is. So that's why I think the other piece of it, right? All these companies, to my point earlier about burning bridges, they've really it's becoming increasingly transactional at work, and people trust their company less because their company is willing to lay them off even when they have the cash. Their company is willing to change directions. I think it's early to say whether that's super smart and what the company should be doing, or whether that's, really short-sighted. I think for some of these moves, it's still early, but it does destroy trust. It burns it. And so I think for a lot of companies, when you burn enough trust, you'll think about how to buy it. And how to buy it might be acqui-hiring a team who already works well together, might be hiring a group of people who've worked together before, because people who know each other work faster.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for explaining that. I mean, I've been in organizations where we outsourced a lot of work to India. And, I whilst that's not technology taking roles away, it's a similar kind of principle, isn't it? In that the organization, the management, whatever, think that they can do the work for cheaper somewhere else with someone else or something else. And it's the same erosion of trust. People who are left at the end of it who are coordinated everything that was still there with either now new technology or now a team at the other side of the world, are always going to be questioning, well, if they can do it for this 80% of our team or our department or our site or whatever, when's it next going to be me? And I can absolutely see how, being in the scenario, even with this being technology, it's the same kind of trust breakdown that would then lead to, having to acqui-hire through. But interesting times. What roles, just coming back to the individual roles, what we obviously mentioned, the cog role, the cog work roles and the marquee role. Which roles do you kind of see compounding, get repriced? Which kind of roles disappear? Have you looked down into kind of role-specific types in any of the work you've done?
Sure. One role that I think is emerging, and it can come from a few different titles, is what people are calling that orchestration layer. And so whether that's somebody who managed a team before and now they're managing, how do we figure this out between people and agents? Whether that's maybe somebody who was project managing and now they're managing these different workflows, that as long as it's complicated to get a bunch of people and a bunch of technology to achieve something, that is a valuable role if you could do it really well, because you really have to be able to anticipate second and third order effects. You have to communicate with such a wide range of stakeholders. Those roles, I think, are valuable, are maintaining value, are growing in value. Within other spaces, I would say it's the same split, but within the role. So I'll give you an example. You could find a product manager right now who is getting a $10 million offer because they are that good at what they do, because it's so noisy and difficult right now. It's moved from should we build, can we build this, to, okay, we can build anything. What do we build? Do we include this? Do we not? What does our customer think? That skill set, if you're exceptional at it, you're now really exceptional and you could get a $10 million offer. The same title, a product manager in another company, or maybe even in the same company, might, if they don't have sort of that same scope and skill and breadth, or perceived brand around them, they might be making $100,000 and doing sort of basic feature wire mapping and, kind of still using AI, right? It's not really that one's using AI and one isn't, but one is seeing exponential outcomes versus the other one. And so even within one role, you can see the gap between a front leader and an average worker growing.
Yeah. And do you see that as partly a role of the organisation to help people get to the front leader position, or do you think it's more down to the individual under their own kind of self-autonomy to kind of see what's coming, use it, reading your content, your articles, and kind of pick up the baton themselves?
Oh, what a good philosophical question. I think it's I think it's the role of the organization to set and understand what outcomes they're actually seeking and to create the conditions that those outcomes are possible. I think it's the role of the individual to understand leverage, to understand business. And I don't say that condescendingly. I mean, sincerely, a lot of people, if you ask them, what does your company do? They could say, we make these widgets. If you said, oh, which of those is the most important? They probably couldn't tell you. If you said, oh, what markets are shrinking and what markets are expanding for your company right now? They probably couldn't tell you. And so some of those types of situational navigating elements, right? Like, what are the signals? What's the weather happening around me is maybe the best way to say it. I think the individual is responsible for understanding the weather. And so my content is intended for that, help you understand the weather before you go out hiking. I think as an individual, you can look within your company and look for the weather, look for the clouds, look for the sun. But you can't do it alone. Somebody can be really exceptional in the organization. You need both.
Yeah, you do. And I think I was having this conversation this afternoon, actually, and we were talking about, AI you can build practically anything you can imagine now within an AI bubble. Websites, projects, apps, whatever. It's really democratized building. But the question you need to ask yourself at the beginning, and it's the same thing that an individual and an organization needs to ask, is what should we be building, rather than we've now got this technology, let's run off and build things, is where should we be pointing? So coming back to your weather analogy, is, if you know the weather's going to be sunny at the other side of the horizon, you want to plan for that weather, don't you? You don't want to pack all your rain gear for no reason. You need to understand where you're heading, and then you can orient yourself and then learn the skills you need to make yourself a front runner or whatever. And if you're working at a tangent to your business, then you're never going to align, are you? Ultimately, and then it's a problem on both sides.
Sure. And I think, honestly, the acknowledgement, I think it's just the acknowledgement of that it is shifting is helpful for people, because unlike previous shifts, so let's say the China shock, for example, which is what, economists will call when a bunch of factories moved to China from the US. That's a very visceral, easily to see. You physically see it, right? You're in a town. The town had one factory. The factory is closed. And so it's very visceral and it's very easy to see. This is different in that, it's hitting people whose jobs haven't been very easily measured or easily replaced or easily commodified before, right? A lot of white collar workers understand that has happened in blue collar work, but they don't. This is new to them, right? That this could happen in their work, that things are getting increasingly measured. And I've said it here, right, around the workflows, and that it can happen within the same job title. It's just, it is happening, but it's happening underneath some of the signals we like to look at. We like to say, are there jobs or are there not jobs? And those numbers matter. But I think, what I hope people take from this is how to look beneath that job title and say, okay, what is what has changed about the deal I'm making here? Because fundamentally, work is an exchange. You're exchanging your time and your efforts and your energy in exchange for money and benefits and camaraderie and development. And it's less about, some of those old signals are just less reliable now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I ask everybody that comes on, how are you actually using AI at the minute in your day-to-day life?
Oh my goodness, a few ways. I use it quite a bit on research. So for instance, I have an agent that looks through like SEC filings and flags for me, like interesting structural shifts or interesting patterns. So I'll give you an example of one of those. At the same time that many public companies have announced layoff news, they've either in the same announcement or within the same few months announced stock buybacks. And so I've been curious, what is sort of the ratio of money on stock buyback versus money on severance and layoff? And sometimes it's like 18 to 1. So $18 on stock buyback to every $1 spent on layoff. And so think about it that way. That's not really an efficiency move. That's a capital structure move. So I have an agent that does that. Similarly, I have agents that look for different PR opportunities. For me, it's very heavy on the research. I do use it to edit, but I don't use it to full on write. I haven't figured out how to get it, despite all of my voice that it has. I don't know. I find it falls back into the same old things. Although, what's a real bummer is I long wrote with not this, but that. I always liked that frame in writing, and now AI has ruined it for me. So I'm appreciative of AI and annoyed because some of my own things now don't work anymore. I can't use them anymore. That predated AI.
Yeah, I feel your pain, because I used to use M-dashes unknowingly in my writing, and now all of a sudden everybody knows. As soon as anybody sees an M-dash, it's like, AI, we're not reading it, and I'm like, oh, it's not worth the hassle. I'll just put a comma or something instead. But yeah, it is funny. What do you use? ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, anything else?
Primarily Claude. I will fact check across multiple if I'm using it for stats or numbers or things that I haven't directly read. most of what I talk about, like that ChatGPT, right? Like I'm still reading the study. It might flag for me, there's a new study and you should read it, or here's some of the highlights, but I actually do read all the studies myself. But if otherwise I'm going to use a number or want to fact check something, I always find using multiple LLMs to fact check is really useful, because one or two will be like, this is perfect. And then the third one will be like, did you know about this? And so I use Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude if I'm really digging in on something.
Yeah. Interesting. Fantastic. Right. So, okay. So the second part then is just where I ask my guests to give the listener kind of 3 key takeaways that they can think about, put into practice, something you've been reading, an article that you want to share, a book, whatever, yoga pose. Although I've not had one of them yet shared on the show, but just something that you think is going to be useful. So do you have 3 things?
Well, I have at least 2, but we'll see if once I start rambling, a third one emerges. One,
okay. That's good.
My one takeaway, and I'll just repeat it a bit from our conversation, is just the value and strength in checking the weather. And the weather is not headlines. Those are designed to get you to click, not to get you to change. And so thinking about understanding the systems that you're existing in can be very powerful and empowering. So that's 1, check the weather. 2, a book I'm reading. I'm reading a book called, this is a dramatic title, but it's called I Would Die If I Were You by Emily Rapp. She's a writer, and it is a book about art and grief. And I think acknowledging the grief of change is one of the most powerful ways people can move forward. And so if you're in a creative space, even if you're not in a creative space, but want to explore the ideas of creativity and grief, that's a fantastic book for it. I think I'll stop there. I think I won't do third for filler.
Okay, that's fine. The second one, the book, that does sound interesting. You're right, and I know you mentioned the word grief earlier on when we were talking, but you're right. I mean, it is kind of that change curve, isn't it, that people go through, and they do have to kind of grieve to get over. I know it sounds quite heavy when you're not talking about actual physical loss of something or anything like that, but people do still have to go through that curve to then come out the other side. And sometimes it happens really quickly and you can move through it quite quickly, but sometimes people do experience a longer transition, don't they, really? So yeah, no, that's a really relevant book, actually. Interesting. I'll have to put it on my list. Every time I speak to somebody, I end up adding a book onto my book list, or my Audible book list, should I say. But yeah, okay. Where is the best place for people to learn about what you do, reach out, contact you? Where can they find you?
Substack first. I do spend the most time there. So Amanda Daering, if you're watching or listening, it'll be in the title there, but Daering. I'm also on LinkedIn and happy to chat there. I do have a website, amandadaering.com, but I would say Substack is where you'll find my most recent musings. And I do reply to all of the messages I get there. So if you listen to this and there's a specific question you have or a follow-up, or even better, you totally disagree with me, I would love to hear that.
Fantastic. Well, look, that has been really interesting. Thank you for that. We could talk about this all afternoon, I'm sure. But it's a topic that is going to continue to change over the next few years as AI gets adopted, as companies change, as people change. So look, we're already connected on LinkedIn anyway, so I do keep following. And you are braver than me, because you go on video on LinkedIn a lot more than I do. So hats off. But look, that's been really good. So thank you very much for your time, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you found this useful, hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already, and a review or rating genuinely helps the show, and I do appreciate it, and it keeps my mum happy. There is a growing number of resources at the AILeaderLab.com for leaders who are looking to start implementing AI in their workplace. The link will be in the show notes. Until next time, bye-bye for now.